Backseat Basketball. Today is July 9th, 2015. I'm Jeffrey Bittner. Next to me,
I'm Rob Stanford, also known as Dr. Hot Robbie, also at Dr. Hot Robbie.
Great intro. You did a great job.
Thanks.
Few cleanup things while we have you guys here. We officially are on iTunes. So
that means it's official, right?
It's official. Episode 3, we're on iTunes. We also started the YouTube channel. So if you want to catch us on YouTube, we post the episodes there as well. A little few shout outs. I know you had a few retweets, correct?
I did. We had Cheeseman retweet our podcast last time, which was great. Keep listening.
Also, Teamwork, Dreamwork threw us a few compliments. Always appreciated. Looked at the stats the other day, and again, we are hitting a number of countries all across the U.S., a couple dozen states, United Kingdom, Japan, Slovakia. We've got a big, a decent following in Slovakia. So
we might have to cover Slovakian basketball. Or if you guys, I don't know, do you guys speak, is Slovakian a language or is it an English thing? I don't know much about Slovakia, but apparently we're going to have to do some research because we've got a little underground following. So keep it coming, guys. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm horrible with geography, so no
offense.
Europe.
It's in Europe.
Yes. All right, so we've got some updates this week. Last week was a little bit of a hectic episode. We were knee-deep in free agency. This episode is going to be a little bit of what did we learn in the past 7 days? What weren't we able to cover last week? And just really kind of drilling down, what are these teams going to look like? It seems like most of the dust has settled at this point. Why don't we start with the man who crushed your soul.
The man
who crushed my soul, too.
My hero.
LaMarcus Aldridge.
I mean, he made the right decision. I'm not bitter towards him as a Portland fan, obviously. He gave us great years. He was clearly unhappy there, and the GM, Nick Olshey, came out today and said that when we inherited him 3 years ago, he wasn't a happy player. So, I wish him the best out there in San Antonio. I think he has a great shot to win a championship. It's kind of unfortunate that it comes with the evil empire of the Spurs, but at the same time, he's in a good situation. I think they're going to have a great year. Hopefully, as a Blazers fan, we can find a way to fill his shoes, or at least get back to a competitive level there at the 4.
The Spurs, they've done it again, right? They've got now LaMarcus Aldridge, Timmy D. I mean, do you think, does Timmy D start at the 5 spot? Or, I mean, who's their starting center? That's the one thing I guess I don't understand at this point, because LaMarcus Aldridge doesn't want to play that 5. But regardless, they've got Manu, they've got Kawhi Leonard, they've got Patty Mills, they've got LaMarcus Aldridge, Timmy Duncan, David West, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, signing. I mean, are they the favorites coming out of the West at this point?
Oh, they're my favorites. I mean, it's probably a little too early to see what happens until we see what goes on with the rookies there in summer ball. But they're clearly the favorites in my opinion. I think it doesn't really matter who you put at 5. Popovich is going to change LaMarcus's mentality from being a not 5 player to being a straight team player. They can even run, something like the Warriors did last year, just have a team without positions. And if you have Tim Duncan and LaMarcus Aldridge on the court at the same time, being what's the word I'm looking for? Relieved by David West, that's a pretty good 3 right there. It's a pretty good 3 trio. It's a pretty good trio.
Dur Hot Robbie with the triple duo.
Ugh, getting all tongue-tied.
Is that a 6-pack? I think that's a 6-pack. We do a triple duo, but anyways, I think the big thing with LaMarcus Aldridge, he doesn't want to play the 5 specifically for the defense, right? He doesn't want to bang down low.
And he's never been a rim protector, so it makes sense that he wants to get out on the perimeter. Plus, it helps him transition more into his offensive game, and it's no surprise that he's more of an offensive player than a defensive player to begin with.
What do you think this does to Timmy D's legacy? You think this is obviously methodical and intentional, right? Timmy D was a part of that. Is this a sign that Tim Duncan's on the way out, he's taking LaMarcus Aldridge under his wing, or is it just, hey, we need more help, you're here, we're in?
I think it's the all-in mentality. I mean, Tim Duncan's legacy is pretty much set in stone. Regardless of what happens from here on out, Tim Duncan's going to go down as widely regarded one of the best 4 or 5s of all time. And I don't think anything that LaMarcus Aldridge will do will take away from that. But this definitely gives them a better shot to win a championship. If Duncan wants to win another 2 rings in the next 2 years, this is the best way to go about it.
Agreed. Let's jump into David West just because we're on the Spursian topic. David West.
Signing for the veteran minimum. Turning down, what was it, $12 million? Was it a $12 million offer?
$12 million. Turns down $12 million, signs for right around $1 million with the Spurs. It doesn't seem fair, kind of, right?
Right. Fairness probably has very little to do with the NBA in general. But that being said, I mean, how much is winning a championship worth to you? Granted, there's no income tax in Texas, but that comes out to something like $1 million difference if he was to take that $12 million contract, like a $1 million cut. So the difference between making $12 million or making $11 million and making $1 million isn't a huge deal. I mean, it is a huge deal, but let's see what happens with.
Holy smokes, there, champ!
I got deep pockets over here. But the important thing is, I mean, what can happen with a championship? Does that add to David West's legacy?
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, at this point, we've seen the Spurs, and they have Greg Popovich, the longest-standing coach at this point, right? Mm-hmm. Still coaching in the NBA. You have a winning culture, a winning mentality. You've got Tim Duncan there, who's a veteran. They're good at drafting people. They're good at bringing up-and-coming stars up. We think that Timmy Duncan at some point in time is going to retire here in the next 20 years, right, eventually.
I would say close to 20.
Yeah, he's eventually going to retire with Manu and Tony Parker. And it's interesting. I mean, it's like the Spurs retooled without ever getting rid of their old tools, which makes it, in my opinion, extremely frightening. It's positive, in my opinion, to see an organization that can just act like an adult organization and just have, good internal, internal mojo and external presence to where you have guys like David West who are willing to turn down $12 million and play for $1 million.
Right.
I mean, that I think is one of the largest we've ever seen someone turn down money-wise to go play for a contender, which is huge. Again, I think it speaks volumes for the Spurs organization.
Right.
I guess my thing, I don't see David West. I don't see where David West fits in there, but that's just me. To me, David West is like, I would have assumed he was their backup plan, right? If LaMarcus Aldridge re-signed with Portland or signed with the Phoenix Suns, I think David West makes more sense there. I'm not sure what spot. He's kind of that elbow stretch four that Timmy D is, that LaMarcus Aldridge is. I've never seen him play five.
No, and he's too small to play five, but he is more of a back to the basket type player. He's going to bang down low. He's going to give them the physicality that LaMarcus and Tim just can't anymore. LaMarcus because he won't, Tim because he's old. But he gives them a mental and physical presence in the paint. He can shoot and he can stretch, but at the same time, he's going to be their Draymond Green. He's going to be the player that they rally around, especially on defense, especially when the trenches get tough. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see him come off the bench for basically the first time in his life. So we'll see how he adjusts to that mentally. But I think on the court, they're going to have no problem fitting him in.
It's going to be interesting to see. Let's jump to Enes Kanter. Your Portland Trailblazers made a offer, which Enes Kanter signed with the Portland Trailblazers.
Right.
He is a restricted free agent. The Oklahoma City Thunder have the option, and for all intents and purposes, it looks like they're going to match that, right? They don't want to necessarily lose Enes Kanter, but it's going to put them in the luxury tax.
It's going to put them pretty deep into the luxury tax because not only would they like to re-sign Kanter, but they also have Kevin Durant on a max deal. They have Russell Westbrook on a max deal, and they have Serge Ibaka coming back for a lot of money also. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they match. I don't really want them to as a Blazers fan, mostly because, he is going to be that LaMarcus Aldridge replacement, especially with Robin Lopez leaving. So he means a lot more to Portland right now than I think he does to Oklahoma City. But I mean, it's gonna determine whether or not Oklahoma City wants to pay him max money because that's the offer that Portland gave him.
I love these types of moves, and it's just me. You see restricted free agents, And there's obviously, they come with this restricted tagline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's known that a team can make a restricted free agent an offer and the other team can match. And almost always the other team matches, right? It's always a young talent who's got potential. And at the very least, right, the offering teams offering this money, that's quote unquote their market value. Worst case is you match and you can trade them if you want to later, whatever it looks like. But it's always interesting to me because I guess if I was a team, I would do this kind of gamble, right? The Portland Trailblazers can't lose really anything besides time for making this kind of offer to Enes Kanter, right?
And it's really the only way that they might sway him away from Oklahoma City is by offering a max contract sheet, because we all know he's not there yet. He's not a max player yet, but the chance that he gets there in the next 2 to 3 years is real strong. So you're betting on potential with the Blazers, who are, as we mentioned last week and the week before, losing LaMarcus Aldridge, maybe in a little bit of a rebuild mode.
Yeah, I think it's a great pickup for the Trailblazers if they can get them. Mm-hmm. It's going to be the Thunder. I mean, they're kind of the dark horse. How did they become the dark horse for the title? I don't know, but they really are in everyone's mind. I mean, you were just talking about the Spurs, obviously Golden State Warriors. If Thunder's healthy,
you got to put them in the conversation if they're healthy. I mean, the one thing that held him out last year was Kevin Durant's injury, and if he's back, I mean, he's arguably the best player in the world up there with LeBron. So it's gonna be cool to see, you know, what they put together there in Oklahoma City, and it's gonna be real cool to see if they actually do start competing for a championship. I know that, like you said, they are considered the dark horse now, but for me, I would still put them ahead of the Rockets. I would put them ahead of, obviously, now the Mavericks. I'd put them ahead of the Clippers. So dark horse to an extent, but it's still the Western Conference, and any team can come out of there.
The Thunder, I think at some point in time, even if they go into the luxury tax, even if they go over cap, I think they have to match Enes Kanter. They've got to give themselves the best shot possible to win this year.
And that
to
has a
show
lot to
Durant.
do.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that has a lot to do with how they feel about Steven Adams too. If they think Steven Adams, their first round pick from a couple years ago, is going to step into that role and play like Kanter, and like you're about to say, convince Durant to stay, then that's a cheaper option for them, and they can avoid that luxury tax. But you have to have some real strong faith in Adams.
Adams, for all intents and purposes, has been a promising young big. I don't know if he's that starting guy per se. The one thing with Enes Kanter, doesn't have the greatest defense ever, so it's hard to say. I mean, it's just an interesting mix-up. If I was the Oklahoma City Thunder and I had any potential of losing Kevin Durant, I would put as much talent around him as I could, right? Mm-hmm. Even if people are coming off the bench, and you know, we'll see what happens, and hopefully you make the finals or you win the championship this year, and when he becomes a free agent, you can use that as a selling point.
Right, but as we've seen in the past, we don't necessarily need teams to go into the luxury tax to win championships. Like, let's go back to the Spurs here for a second. Since like 2006, they've only gone into the tax a couple times, paying $13 million in total. I mean, and in that span, they've gone to they've won two different championships.
Yes. You don't need to go into the luxury tax necessarily to win a championship.
You do, though, as you were saying, to convince your stars to stay.
Right. It's more about paying that money to convince your stars to stay. We'll talk about that with the Cavs. I mean, they're obviously signed a number of people.
I think they have half the NBA on their team now.
At least half of the bill.
Half the bill, and probably close to 30 to 40 players at this point. It just seems like every day there's a new report coming out. Cavs sign Mo Williams. Cavs sign LeBron today for a 2-year contract worth something like $48 million with the option to opt out after the second year. And I'm not, downing paying LeBron anything. Like, I'd pay $50 million a year for him. That being said, another opt out after another year just basically shows that he runs the show in Cleveland.
Agreed. I think they're at some ridiculous number for their cap. They're way, way, way over the cap. They're like obviously
double, I think.
I think they're almost at, like, they just blew through. I think even like most of the, I mean,
they're approaching the hard cap. I do know that.
Right. I mean, they've got Kyrie at $20 million. They've got Kevin Love at $20 million. They obviously are going to have LeBron at to 22, 24. They're talking about playing Tristan Thompson 16, 17 mil a year, or what, 15 mil a year,
which increases to 20 by the end of his contract.
Right. They paid Iman Shumpert 10 mil. They're talking about bringing back J.R. Smith. They signed Mo Williams. They're talking about bringing back Deladova.
They had Varejao just signed last year for 4 year, $40 million.
Crazy. But this just goes to show you that there are some. It's tough, right? It's tough. We know it's tough, but you can blow through that cap space if you're smart about it, right?
You got to spend that cheddar to make that cheddar.
Potentially. Especially when it's not your money. I found it's much easier to spend someone else's money than my own money, right?
Oh, yeah. Just ask LeBron. He's been spending Dan Gilbert's money like it's going out of style.
Seriously. So speaking of Dan Gilbert, we're talking about owners. We're talking about players. I mean, we talk about LeBron James and Dan Gilbert and their kind of dynamic. Interesting turn of events in the past 24 hours with good old DJ.
DeAndre Jordan pulled one of the most, I don't know if I've ever seen it before. I remember it when, Hedo Turkoglu was going to sign with the Blazers, and then last second he re-signs a 4-year deal with the Raptors while he's in Portland, just does a complete 180 and goes to Toronto. But you don't see it with max players where they basically say they're going to sign with a team and then blatantly go behind their agent's back and sign with another team.
It's crazy. And there was a lot of reports coming out after the fact. So DeAndre Jordan's agent is Dan Fagan. Dan Fagan's also Chandler Parsons' agent.
And Mark Cuban's good bowling buddy, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, like they smoke cigars or something together at some point in time. He's also Dwight Howard's agent. There was a lot of talk that the reason why the Mavs got Chandler Parsons was as a thank you to Dan Fagan from the Rockets for basically gifting them Dwight Howard. So right. There's some weird under the table stuff going on here, but basically, I mean, from what we saw last week, the Mavericks quote unquote signed. And now the big thing with the moratorium is they can have
everything's tentative.
They can have these verbal agreements, but nobody can sign contracts until the 9th. So today's the 9th. So at midnight today was when people could actually physically sign the contracts. And that's the moratorium. Basically, the league is still calculating out cap space numbers. They're still figuring out the exact dollar amounts. It's this weird kind of moratorium period where, again, the league's trying to figure out their numbers. Players can agree to go somewhere, but they haven't signed a contract yet, right? It's the equivalent of like me shaking your hand and telling you I'm going to buy your used car, but until I actually come to the table with cash, the deal's not necessarily done yet, right?
Right. And as a result of that, we saw this mad frantic rally last night where we heard that the Clippers and their ownership and all their players were basically bombarding DeAndre Jordan's house, convinced him to stay. And then Chris Broussard releases this tweet saying, sources say Cuban is beside himself, driving around downtown Houston, begging through text Jordan's family for the address of DeAndre's home. And Mark Cuban went off on Chris Broussard for this. But it just goes to show you that, these players basically hold the cards, and they're having these owners cater to them. And, to talk about DeAndre here for a minute, how is he getting max money? Do you really think that he would, if he went to Dallas, he would deserve max money? So we're talking about a player who in his career averages 8 points a game and 9 rebounds a game. Averages per game, 8 points, 9 rebounds. Is that someone you're willing to pay $20 million to? Sure, he had a great season last year, but he had Chris Paul as his point guard. I mean, at what point is it just like, you know what? That's too much money. And maybe it was the smartest move of all time for the Mavericks to basically, let DeAndre Jordan walk out the door, not saying they did that, but God, they would be cap strapped over the next 4 years if they signed a lower top tier level in DeAndre Jordan.
So I'm interested just to hear from your perspective, like who's a better center? So this is saying that His last year, he averaged 11 points per game and 15 rebounds.
I'm talking about career averages. Career average is 8 points a game, 9 rebounds a game.
Right. So, I mean, I get you. To me, the tough part's the free throw thing. I think that's the tough part for Chris Paul,
that's the worst part. I mean, there's not a single player in the NBA that does one thing at basketball as bad as DeAndre Jordan shoots free throws. Like, you can talk about Shaquille O'Neal shooting three-pointers. It's not as bad as DeAndre Jordan shooting free throws.
I think we're going to disagree on this, and that's good. We should disagree on a few things. I agree with you. He's not a perfect center. He's not Dwight Howard in his prime, but I think...
He's not Dwight Howard right now, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree with you. Oh, you mean Dwight Howard right now? Yeah, and maybe that's the case too. I think if he could shoot free throws, it would be a little bit better for him. You look at the defense, and he is a great finisher at the rim when basically he's allowed to dunk it. He's not a back-to-the-basket guy. I think with the cap salary going up, I would gamble. He's basically an expensive Tyson Chandler, a younger, expensive Tyson Chandler.
Right. But to be honest with you, we were talking about Tyson Chandler last week and how I thought that the Suns overpaid for him. I would say they're very comparable players. As far as talent on the court goes, they're extremely comparable players. So if I was upset that the Suns overpaid for Tyson Chandler, I think the Clippers and Mavericks would have grossly overpaid for DeAndre Jordan. I don't think it's even close.
I don't think he can be your centerpiece. I think that's what he was looking for. It's hard to tell. He wants to be this guy, and Mark Cuban sold him on, you're going to be our number one guy. You're going to do post-ups. We're gonna do pick and rolls with you specifically. You're going to get more touches. That might just be a horrible idea. Who knows? You know what I mean? And it sounds like that's kind of where you're coming from.
Oh, absolutely.
But if I'm the Mavs, I think it was a smart move for the Mavs. I think.
Oh, definitely a smart move for the Mavs. They don't have a point guard that can get him the ball the way CP3 gets DJ the ball right now.
You're saying smart move to let him go?
Oh, yes.
I was saying I think it's a decent signing for the Mavs if they kept him. You've got Dirk Nowitzki, who spreads the floor a little bit. You have Chandler Parsons, who also spreads the floor. Eventually, Dirk's going to retire. You're going to have, in the next year or two, if the cap goes to $100 million, what we think, they're saying like $100 million. Even if you have DeAndre at 20.
Just to speak to that real quick before you get to that point, next year it's going up $7 million per team, so it's going to $70 million next year for the cap.
What was the number?
Next year it goes up to 70.
Wait, this year it's at 70.
This year's at 70. Next year, and then the year after that, we could see it go up to 100.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's a gamble. It makes sense why the Clippers want him because they don't have any money to spend anywhere else. But, I mean, so let's talk about some of the drama that went down. So he obviously agreed to go with the Mavs, and he basically changed his mind, which is just so insane. And then obviously everyone rallied. So he lives in Houston, which is funny enough because it's obviously in Texas. He lives in Houston. And Doc and J.J. Redick and Chris Paul left vacation. Blake Griffin and Paul Pierce all flew to Houston in his house.
Let's hope he doesn't live in a one-bedroom apartment like you and I.
He does not. They flew to his house to basically convince him to sign, and they basically met with him. So the drama is that they met with him. And then he was supposed to take a meeting with the Mavs. That was what one report came out. But the Clippers just basically refused to leave. And I think the funniest part about the whole day was the emoji war. Did you see that?
I actually missed that. I got off Twitter last night pretty early. I had to go to bed early.
So the emoji war was, there was reports that came out that DeAndre Jordan was considering flip-flopping, basically. And Chandler Parsons tweeted an emoji of a plane, basically saying, like, he's immobilizing to go talk to DeAndre Jordan. And then Chris Paul tweeted an emoji of a banana boat and a boat. And Blake Griffin tweeted like a spaceship and a plane, basically saying that he was mobilizing. But then the best part was there was Paul Pierce, who doesn't know how to work emojis. And
or
just
Twitter, probably.
Or Twitter.
He's probably the same age of our parents at this point.
He tweeted a picture of an emoji.
I hadn't seen that. That's great.
Yeah, and then so the best part was after they had talked to DeAndre, and there's basically word that he was going to sign with the Clippers. Blake Griffin put an Instagram photo of a chair being shoved under the door. Did you see that?
The lock-in, yeah, I saw that.
He's like, I'm not a furniture expert, but I don't know if I would put my chair here. I thought that was great. So so does this expose a flaw? Do you think DeAndre Jordan did anything wrong here? I mean, obviously, we just talked about he's not legally obligated. He basically, if you rationalize it, right, he made a huge career move, right?
He decided where he's going to be for the next 4 years.
Right. It's like tentatively accepting a job and then sitting at home and thinking about it for 7 days and then realizing like, oh,
I'm in a pretty good place.
I actually don't want to work at that place, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them I'm going to decline, right?
I'm going to rescind my 2-week notice from my old job.
I'm going to beg for my old job back, right?
Right.
They just happen to want him back. And I'm not sure if he necessarily did anything wrong.
I don't think he did anything wrong. I don't even think that the Clippers or Steve Ballmer or the Mavericks or Mark Cuban did anything wrong. This is just part of the negotiating. And you have to be able to sell all the way through the sale. ABC, always be closing.
Always be closing. So do you think Dan Fagan, the agent, pushed him? And that was one thing.
I think DeAndre Jordan completely shut his agent out, which is the reports that are coming out now, that the agent was pushing very, very hard to go to Dallas. And DeAndre basically just shut him out the last 24 hours and made a decision on his own.
Crazy. So you're a big fan of Wes Matthews. He obviously signed with the Mavs.
Right. Let me talk about DeAndre real quick. My favorite quote of DeAndre Jordan was Charles Barkley. I think it was maybe a year or two ago, where he said that if you put DeAndre Jordan on a basketball court at night, shut off the lights, and come back in the morning and tell him he's not allowed to dunk, he'll come back with 8 points.
Wait, say that again.
If you put him in a basketball court, in a basketball room, leave him there overnight, shut off the lights, and tell him he's not allowed to dunk, he's scoring 8 points.
You're saying that's all he can score is 8 points?
Have you seen him shoot?
Yeah.
Did you watch the playoffs? Did you watch any basketball last year?
I'm with you. I just didn't get Charles Barkley's humor, but I get it.
Not many people do. It's a very classy, fine-tuned humor.
Classy man, Charles Barkley. Classy man. So
yes, Wes Matthews. I think that originally Wes Matthews had taken a little bit off of his contract because they needed to make room for DeAndre Jordan. Now he's making max money. And again, I think the Mavericks are overpaying for a player who, first of all, was not a max player at his prime. He's now entering close to his 30s. He's not going to get much better than the best he's already seen that we saw with him in Portland. Not to mention he's coming off of a torn Achilles. As soon as his ankle starts hurting.
Is it Achilles or Achilles?
Achilles. Like the...
I've been saying it wrong this whole time.
Achilles? I don't know. It's
Achilles?
The Greek guy.
Achilles?
And his heel. Yeah.
I've always said Achilles.
I don't think it matters.
Okay, keep going.
As soon as his ankle starts hurting, all the Mavs fans are going to start second-guessing this, just like they started second-guessing the leaving of DeAndre Jordan. So it's really going to determine, where the Mavericks are at in 5 years based almost solely off Wes Matthews' play, which is a scary thought.
You have Wes Matthews and Chandler Parsons and a guy who's probably going to retire in the next 24 months. That's scary.
I don't see Dirk coming back for a second year after the debacle that's happened in Dallas this offseason. I think this is his last year.
Mark Cuban went on the record and said that originally, if they didn't get the free agents that they signed, so if they didn't get DeAndre Jordan and Wes Matthews,
or Jeremy Lin, we keep forgetting about him. He left also.
He went to the Charlotte Hornets.
Right, after saying that he was going to commit to the Dallas Mavericks.
Did he?
Yes. At least someone in his camp said that he was going to the Mavericks.
That he was leaning that way? Yeah. So he said if they didn't get Wes Matthews and DeAndre Jordan, which at that time they thought they had signed both, that they were going to tank. So it's real interesting now. Mark Cuban, an owner, admits fully that tanking's a strategy, right? Which everyone kind of wants to. It's like the elephant swept under the rug. You know what I mean? In our secret hidden house. But we obviously know there's tanking. But he said, hey, if we didn't get DeAndre Jordan and Wes Matthews, we were going to tank. Now DeAndre leaves. You have an old Wes Matthews, Chandler Parsons, who's like at this point, all we know him as like a third option, really,
and severely overpaid.
And on a large contract. Again, I still think that's fair at this point with the it was overpaid last year. I think it's fair with the cap spike.
So 5 years, it was overpaid last year. It's overpaid this year, and most likely it'll be overpaid next year. So you have 2 good years with Chandler Parsons.
Well, contract-wise, he actually, I think this is technically, I think he did sign a 3-year with the third.
That's right. He did sign the 3-year. He did sign the 3-year. So anyway, you strike it. Not a great contract, at least in the Mavericks standpoint.
I think they needed to give him that contract if they wanted to steal him away. But yeah, I agree with you.
Or if you want to keep Dirk.
Right? But so DeAndre leaves, and Wes Matthews, right? You now have Wes Matthews. Mark Cuban basically went on record and said that he told Wes Matthews that he didn't have to stay with the Mavs if he didn't want to. And I think that was twofold. A, you had originally promised the guy that DeAndre was going to be there.
And B, you don't want to play a mediocre player max money.
Well, secondly, it's just like, yeah, it's like, dude, we'd like to tank if we can tank, if at all possible. So I thought that was interesting. The one thing I've read is it a possibility that the Mavs just blow it all up and they do tank? I mean, do you have the respect for Dirk, even though he's been a Mavs his entire career, where it's like, hey, man, we're obviously not going to be good this year. They're not making the playoffs, right?
I think they make the playoffs.
You think they're going to make the playoffs?
I think they sneak into the 7 or 8 spot, just simply because it's Dallas. They're in the playoffs every year. They're in the chase every year. It's like saying last year when you were telling me that the Spurs weren't going to make playoffs. Of course they're going to make playoffs.
Oh, I didn't. I never said that.
You were pulling that the Suns were going to come in the 8th spot, which means either that the Spurs were kicked out or who was the other? The Pelicans.
So the Mavs have no point guard, no credible NBA point guard,
no center,
and they've got Zaza Pachulia now as their center.
Yeah, that's a trade we haven't talked about yet, but they just got him from the Bucks as, I guess, a quelling point for losing everybody.
Like at a certain point, it's like, well, we gotta put 5 people out there.
Yeah, like how many people we have on the roster? I don't know, like 4. All right, Mark Cuban, you're checking in at the 3.
So, I mean, like, I think they're going to be really bad. I mean, I think it makes sense to trade Dirk. It would be interesting to see where he could go. That's somewhat of a contender. And what would they be able to get back for Dirk at this point would be interesting as well,
Right. So I don't really know that they trade Dirk. I think Dirk is going to be a lifetime Mav, and we're going to get into our hypothetical trades here in 10 minutes or so. But I think that Dirk's going to be a lifetime Mav, just like Tim Duncan's a lifetime Spur, just like Kobe's a lifetime Laker. He's one of those players that built that team. Dallas wouldn't even be on the map as far as basketball is considered without him. Him and Steve Nash basically ran that team for the better part of a decade.
Yeah, so Kobe's been a Laker his entire career, but at one point in time they went to him and said, hey, we'll trade you if you want. We realize we're not going to be great. Pick some places and we'll try and trade you there.
But where is he now? He's still in LA.
Right. Because he ended up wanting to stay, and he ended up.
And they've been bad for the past 2 years. So necessarily, like, winning isn't everything. Legacy has a lot to do with it for these players.
Hey, Dirk, if you want to come to the Suns, we got a spot for you.
Hey, we have a new opening in Portland too. Fresh opening. Come on in.
That's actually what my trade centered around, my hypothetical trade. So we'll talk about that here in a second.
Okay.
So just one more free agent we're going to talk about. Do you want to talk about the Suns pickup? I always talk about the Suns.
No, let's let you talk about the stretch for Teletovic.
So Teletovic was with the Brooklyn Nets.
Right.
They basically kind of let him become an unrestricted free agent.
Well, let's not even get into the Nets cap problems right now.
Yeah, we're not even going to let him. We're not even get into that. But he's a stretch 4. The Suns picked him up on a decent $5.5 million a year contract. The one weird thing, I think this is a great pickup. It's another stretch 4. So now we're kind of going back to when the Suns were winning, right? So you had Channing Frye. Now we've got the guy that we picked up from Memphis. We have, and yes, I say we because I'm a Suns fan. We have Teletovic. So I think it's a good pickup. All intents and purposes, it fills the need for them. They needed a backup at that 4 spot. They're looking to trade Markieff Morris.
Yeah, and potentially not even a backup, like you just mentioned. If Markieff goes, stretch fours are so hard to find in the NBA. Most power forwards, and it's starting to trend that way, where a lot of the power forwards are becoming stretch fours, and that's what people are recruiting in college. That's what people are recruiting in the NBA. They're trying to get more stretch fours. But at the current state right now, that's a hard position to find. You still have the rebounding back to the basket four as the primary position for a power forward. So to be able to, really, really get a decent, and I mean, he could be good, but a very, very decent stretch four for $5 million a year and staying under the cap. I think they still have something like $5 million left before they run out. It's a great pickup. Probably their best pickup this offseason outside of Brandon Knight.
They let Gerald Green walk, but I think it helps too with the stretch fours when you have that defensive anchor, right?
Correct.
And they obviously picked up Tyson Chandler for better or for worse, and so they've got that defensive anchor where they can have more of an offensive four spot. So we're going to see how that all works out. Expect them to make more trades. Ryan McDonough went on the radio and basically said that they're going to plan on spending their cap space. Why not?
Yeah, might as well.
And Markieff doesn't seem happy that we traded away his other half, so it looks like they're going to try and get rid of Markieff Morris as well. So look for that.
Speaking of trades, we had a couple big players get traded today. We mentioned already.
Literally.
Yeah, some big players, some tall players. We had, as we mentioned earlier, we have Pachulia going to the Mavericks, but then we also had the 7-2 oaf in Roy Hibbert coming on over to L.A. La La Land. What do you think about that?
I like Hibbert. It's weird to me.
It just takes him 10 seconds to run up the court. That's the only problem with him.
That's the only problem. I mean, it's
10-15 seconds.
It's weird to me. My biggest thing with Hibbert is he was an all-star, defensive player of the year, the anchor that held that, top defense down. And like within one season, like the Pacers, like there's this rumors floating around with like why he's upset at other players, and they had that one bad spurt in the playoffs, and the Pacers are just like ready to throw him under the bus. And I don't know what that is, if it's just like an emotional thing, if he's just like that guy that's just bringing everyone down.
Right.
I'm not sure, but it seems to me, I mean, I think Brook Lopez is a great example where you have a big guy. I mean, Brook Lopez got hurt. You have a big guy where he had a potential. He was an all-star. He obviously did good things on the basketball court as a big man and got injured, and they're still willing to pay him a big contract. To me, I don't understand why. I would be okay with Roy Hibbert being on, my team. I think maybe he just needs a change of scenery. So I think it's a good move for the Lakers. They didn't have to give up that much. They gave up a second-round pick. Second-round pick's like, throwing in a penny and getting a wish back.
Right, exactly. I mean, to me, Roy Hibbert is basically the same as DeAndre Jordan, except he can shoot a little bit better. I mean, he's obviously not the athleticism that DJ has, and he can't, like I said earlier, he can't run. But at the same time, he's a serviceable five. He's going to be, he's going to start in LA. And basically, if you're giving up a second-round pick, you're really not giving up too much to get a starting position player. So I think it is interesting to see him on the Lakers, but it's hard to imagine a player other than maybe Andrew Bynum that was as inconsistent as Roy Hibbert has been over the past 3 years. Like you said, he's an all-star 1 year. He's runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year. Next year, before you know it, he's barely starting. They're looking for replacements for him in Indiana, and now they trade him for a second-round pick. I mean, would you trade an all-star on any other team for anything less than a first? Probably not.
And that just goes to show you that the Pacers were just like, it just seems like they were done with him. It seems like that friend in that friend group, and we've all seen this happen, where it's just like they're so quick just to throw this one friend under the bus because nobody liked him. You know what I mean? It was just like, it seemed like he must have just, he had a bad presence or something with that organization, because they were ready just to like, he was on thin ice already, it seemed like, and he had that one bad playoff run and ruined it. So,
well, I think they maybe blame him a little bit for Lance Stevenson leaving too. Because I know they did want to keep Lance. They didn't want to pay him as much as Charlotte did originally, but they wanted to keep him because he was so young, and Lance Stevenson wanted to win now, which is why he originally went to Charlotte, because they were supposed to be the up-and-coming team last year, even though they kind of fell flat on their face. He went to Charlotte to become his own player, to build a franchise, and he didn't feel like he could get that in Indiana because of Roy Hibbert's gigantic collapse the second half of last season or 2 seasons ago, and his pretty awful playoff run too.
Right. We'll see. We'll see how he does on the Lakers. I mean, the one thing about the Lakers, they make these moves, and we saw these moves last year, right? They got Jeremy Lin, and it's like
Jeremy Lin.
They're still going to be bad.
It's like we're bringing in a bunch of role players. Now we're going to win more than 15 games, but still less than 20. Like at what point is success really success?
Yeah. So it looks like, I mean, it's going to be interesting because the Lakers obviously they don't have that pick anymore. They don't have next year's pick. It's top 3 protected. So they're either going to have to go big this year, or they're going to have to go big and get some free agents or make a big trade, or they're going to have to tank again and be in the bottom 3. Otherwise, the Sixers pick up that pick. So it's going to be interesting. You might have to just go for DeMarcus Cousins. Trade your 2, D'Angelo Russell and Julius Randle, and we'll see.
Throw Hibbert in there.
All right, let's jump to – you want to jump into the rants?
We can do that. Let's do that right now. Let me pull it up here real quick. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the difference between rebuilding and tanking, which we've already touched on, quite a bit in the first 3 episodes here. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the draft was around the corner and we're dealing with teams that actually have cap space. So a bunch of the teams that we're talking about are actually in rebuild mode. So, how do you build a dominant franchise in the NBA? In my opinion, there's 3 schools of thought, and all 3 are currently being experimented with in today's game. The first is the most obvious, due in large part to the amount of media attention and, of course, our podcast attention that it's gotten as of late. And that would be Sam Hinkie's Sixers route of thinking, and that's tanking. This controversial method requires an extremely dedicated fan base, along with a core of young players who are satisfied with losing for the foreseeable future, with the promise of one day becoming a dynasty. But what happens when you draft a Greg Oden, a Kwame Brown, Sam Bowie, or even a Joel Embiid? Regardless of your team's success, and I use that term lightly, is set back for an entire year and even possibly more. One swing and a miss, and you have another decade of falling short of expectations. On the other hand, you might hit a bullseye, and you can see that plan working in New Orleans with Anthony Davis. The second is the most popular school of thought among current NBA teams, and that's building through the free agency. We've seen landscape shift entirely for a team when they bring in a marquee player to anchor their franchise. This is a great way to energize your fan base and has a win-now mentality. But one player can't change a team by himself, LeBron notwithstanding. It requires key role players and a coach that can control not only talent, but the egos that come along with that talent. We've seen it fail in places like Denver with Allen Iverson, Philly with Andrew Bynum, Chicago with Ben Wallace. And sometimes you see success stories, like when Shaq came over to the Lakers, creating one of the most powerful duos. I'm having trouble with duos and trios today. I don't know why.
Triple duos.
But you see that with Shaq moving to the Lakers and creating one of the most powerful duos of all time with Kobe by his side. The third option, and in my opinion the best option, is believing in your personnel, which means both players and coaches. And let me define what it means real quick, since the term is so loosely intertwined in all sports. As a player, trusting in your process it's a lot to take in, especially for a 20-year-old coming from high school and 1 to 2 years of college, where at each level they're considered to be a star and the best player on the court. But if a team is able to draft a player and mold their mentality and skills to become first a role player, then a sixth man, then a starter, he can over time develop into a perennial all-star and become the building block for what's a dynasty. And if you find players who can lead others to do the same, then you have a team that can compete for a title year after year after year. And if you look at a team like the recent champs, the Golden State Warriors, they never had to tank to get Steph Curry or Clay or Draymond or Harrison or even Iggy. Steph was the 7th pick and was the selection after soon-to-be-retired players like Hasheem Thabeet and Johnny Flynn. His shooting skills translated to the pro game with ease. However, at Davidson, he was considered undersized, weak on defense, and a below-average ball handler. Fast forward 6 seasons later, and Curry's the reigning MVP. His team won a championship last year. His crossover on CP3 became the most watched basketball highlight during the season, and he's now on what's considered to be the most team-friendly contract in the NBA at just over $11 million a year. His coaches honed his skills, and he worked his craft to become the best shooter, teammate, and leader on the court at any given night. That winner's mentality has inherently rubbed off on his teammates, mentioned earlier, and the Warriors look to repeat their success for years and years to come. The hard part about getting a player to buy into a coach's system, and if that doesn't happen, you end up with a coach and player butting heads. And then, before you know it, you're the Sacramento Kings.
We just love the Sacramento Kings. No one from Sacramento's ever going to like us.
Do they have... Yeah, they have podcasts in Sacramento.
All right. Great job.
Thank you.
My stage theater this week is called Basketball is Just Entertainment. Basketball is entertainment. We tend to forget that. The score, wins and losses, championships seem to distract us from the fact that we all just want to be entertained. Each game is its own story arc. David's going against Goliaths, ups and downs, improbable victories and unexpected losses. The rise and the fall of heroes before our eyes. Do you remember when it used to only be the game that entertained us? Back in the before times, you could only watch your local team compete. Colors flew and were worshipped as a sign of state pride or hometown loyalty. Then games became nationally televised. Your favorite colors didn't have to have state pride. You could follow the superstars, just be a random fan. Technology exploded. The 24-hour news cycle took over when we went from casual fan to unproclaimed stalkers. Every micro decision is analyzed. Twitter feeds constantly refreshing. What did he tweet? Who's reporting what? Did you see that thing that one player posted on Instagram? Who is he on vacation with? Fandom flipping and flopping. Over-crucifixion of a game that is essentially high-stakes roulette. Each decision is not only analyzed, but can be commented on by every fan and every reporter. Anyone can get on social media and shout the best course of action or hang a GM out to dry. To make things worse, each player has become more transparent, proclaiming motivations and desires to their buddies to be leaked to the media. Because we know what the players want, the end goal is no longer behind a veil. It feels obtainable and possible. Small market with a chance to win, we can provide that. A spot to be the man, let's just trade all of our guys and we can give that to you. Casual fans roster baiting seems to be the new norm. I hear amateurs even have a podcast now. Ridiculous. My team didn't win a championship last year. Did yours? If not, would you rather just try again next year with the same group? I wouldn't. I would rather my GM make a trade every single day than not make one at all. Why? It makes for good entertainment. Each trade, each Twitter feed update with my team mentioned is one more point of hope, one more point of optimism. Yes, maybe this is our year. Additionally, it just makes us feel like they're at least trying. They have to do something. Each year, just when you thought you've seen this movie before, everything changes. LeBron took the Heat to the finals 4 times, but only won twice. Now the Heat struggle to make the playoffs, but again might be good next year? We have to see. The Spurs looked unstoppable last year, but in 2015 got out in the first round against the Clippers. No one even saw the Golden State Warriors coming, but were favorites after 20 games. Nothing is ever officially decided. Maybe you hate the reporting, hate the updates, don't like the social media accounts, or just want to watch the games. Maybe you think Deandre should be fined or a local player should never switch teams. All of that is great. Amongst the chaos, I implore you to remember one thing, casual fan or not. Basketball is just entertainment. We tend to forget that. The score, wins and losses, championships seem to distract us from the fact that we all just want to be entertained.
Nice. Mucho bueno, señore.
I love the rants. They might be the best part of our segment.
It's my favorite part.
Great stuff.
Just unbridled truths coming out of me.
I feel like we were getting real philosophical with it. It's like basketball, but it's about life.
Life is so mysterious.
All right, we're going to go to, every once in a while, we do the hypothetical trades where Rob and I, again, amateurs, we take the wheel. We say, hey, this is the best trade for you. This is the best trade for me.
Yeah. So mine actually revolves a little bit around what we talked about earlier, and that was Dirk Nowitzki possibly getting traded. And here's my mentality behind it. He is very old at this point. I don't think that's surprising. He's extremely old. But he still has some good years left in the tank, if even only a year. He's not going to want to play for a team that's not competing for a championship. And I get what I said earlier was that I don't think they'll trade him, and I don't think he'll leave, mostly because he has a legacy in Dallas. Mark Cuban has a legacy with Dirk Nowitzki. I don't see him ever leaving Dallas, but also I never saw Steve Nash leaving Dallas. So there is a chance that he leaves, and this is what I think would be real interesting. If he goes to a team that can maybe compete after another move after him. So what they can do is if he were traded to the New York Knicks, which I understand is almost as tanky as the Mavericks at this point, but if he goes to the New York Knicks, teams up with Melo, they bring in a point guard that can actually play, and the Knicks send back Kristaps Porzingis to the Mavericks. It works for the Mavericks because they get the young big man that they're looking for, and hopefully they can, satisfy their fans about not getting their jollies wet with DeAndre Jordan. So the Mavs get him, and then the Knicks can compete for that championship, and Dirk fits in real nicely in the triangle.
I think
granted, now with the stretch is an isosceles triangle, but it's still a triangle nonetheless.
Yeah, I think it's a good move. I mean, we've talked about it a ton. The Knicks, for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, have to pick a road, right? They either got to go old or they got to go complete rebuild. Straddling that,
they're like flirting that line right now.
They're like doing the splits basically. They're trying to ski down the mountain, and their skis are separating, and they're getting like more and more in trouble. And eventually, I think you're right, and that's a smart move. I like that. And maybe so you'd have Robin Lopez, you'd have Dirk Nowitzki, you would have Carmelo Anthony,
and you bring in someone who can actually control those players at the point guard position, whether that be through a trade. I know there's not too many free agents left at this point, but maybe even next year you convince Dirk to come back for another year and you draft a point guard like the Lakers did in D'Angelo Russell. Who knows?
Interesting trade. I tried to find a spot for Markieff Morris. I wasn't super successful.
Got to get him out of Phoenix, huh?
I was honestly thinking when we were talking earlier that him for Dirk might not be a bad move. If they're going to move Dirk, We'd take Dirk, and we'll give him Markieff. He starts young. He can play with Chandler Parsons.
Contracts are pretty comparable at this point.
Contracts are decently comparable at this point, but my original proposal was Markieff Morris, P.J. Tucker, potentially throw in Archie Goodwin if we have to for Tobias Harris. Complete that kind of rebuild. It doesn't seem like, again, Markieff, he's on a super good contract. He's obviously dealing with some legal troubles. We traded Marcus away. It doesn't sound like Markieff's too happy, so we got to get rid of him. If we bring in Tobias Harris, he can play that 3. He can play that 4 spot. We obviously just signed a couple 4s, but
right. But Toby he's a extreme upgrade over whoever you would throw out there on the Suns originally, whether that be PJ Tucker starting, whether that's someone like TJ Warren starting, whether that's Markieff Morris starting. I think Tobias Harris is definitely an upgrade over all those players. I like it.
Perfect. A few miscellaneous things. You see that banana boat picture, dude? Hilarious.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
LeBron riding bitch seat, sitting in the back.
LeBron.
If he won the championship, he wouldn't be sitting there. He'd be sitting in front. His pants might be off. He'd be dry humping the banana boat. But Steph Curry took away all his manhood. Now he's sitting bitch seat in the back.
Too funny. Well, I guess you hear about Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony and him being friends, but that's the first actual you got to be pretty good friends to go on vacation with someone, right? It just wasn't the level that I'd pictured.
They were pretty chummy.
They were hanging out.
Yeah.
Chris Paul had to leave, unfortunately. Way to ruin that, DeAndre.
Yeah, he had some sort of meeting, some emoji meeting.
The meeting of the emojis. We talked a little bit about Cuban versus Broussard on Twitter. I mean, the one thing, and we'll bring it back real quick, is Cuban obviously disbanded those rumors. Broussard was talking about him driving around. It's just weird.
So Cuban tweeted out to Broussard right afterwards. He said, If you can provide your sources and show me where they said that, I'll provide $100,000 to the charity of your choice. Nothing's happened out of that yet, but it'll be cool to see in the coming days if anything comes to fruition. If maybe, like, Chris Broussard is a well enough known reporter that he's not just making something up. He definitely had reports of some kind, but that's not saying that those reports weren't wrong.
That's totally true. And I've heard too, news reporters or reporters or whatever, insiders, a lot of them won't give up their sources ever, right?
It's not worth $100,000 to a charity.
It's not worth. You'd rather still be in the know and have those people trust you. I know Jalen Rose is like that. I mean, he basically never. He kind of discloses things on the down low because he gets these reports and gets these rumors, and it's kind of off the record, and he can kind of still report on it. But it's an interesting thing. Mm-hmm. We did get a Twitter question this week again. Cheeseman. Vocal fan of ours over the past couple episodes. We appreciate the question.
Keep tweeting us, guys. We really appreciate it. We'll definitely discuss, as long as we have time for it, all the questions you post, but we do have time for this one.
And another thing to think about, too, is if you retweet the podcast tweet, we'll actually give you a shout-out in the beginning. We had a few shout-outs earlier, but the question from Cheeseman, will Big Baby Davis find a team during free agency? If so, where do you think he could land? You want to go ahead I can start if you want.
Yeah, I'd rather have you start on this one. We're talking about Glenn Big Baby Davis.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, Doc pulled him from free agency last year, signed him to the Clippers. They obviously worked together when they were on the Celtics. To me, if he finds a team, it's going to be the Clippers. Just with the history with Doc. Doc's obviously running that team. Maybe, and there's probably a good chance that Austin Rivers and Big Baby Davis both start this year. The funniest thing I heard...
They bring DeAndre Jordan in and don't even play him.
The funniest thing I heard, and I forget where I read this, I listened to it somewhere, and they said that it was like an insider. It might have been Zach Lowe. And Zach Lowe had said that he had talked to like 2 or 3 athletic trainers that had trained Big Baby Davis, and they were like flabbergasted that Big Baby Davis can actually do, like, run up and down the court. Like in their mind, physically impossible, but somehow, like, he's still playing basketball. Like,
any man that I see, like, actually drooling as he's running down the court, I'm okay saying he's not the most athletic person in the world.
But just to hear someone say, like, yeah, no, we're shocked that he's able to do the things he's able to do. Like, it shouldn't be physically possible, but somehow that man is willing himself to continue to play basketball. I thought was hilarious.
So you think he's going back to the Clippers, huh?
I think if he goes
anywhere.
I think if he goes anywhere, he goes back to the Clippers. I mean, I'm trying to think of if there's another spot off the top of my head. Maybe the Knicks throw some money at him. The Lakers might throw some money at him. It's just hard to tell.
So I've got like a different take on it. Like, I've got a bunch of different teams he can go to, and I'm just going to shy away from the Clippers. I don't actually know if he's played with another coach since college other than Doc Rivers. And if that was his only coach, I mean, it's a real good chance he's in real life going to be going back to the Clippers if he gets signed. For me, though, Big Baby Davis, he is sort of the tool that you need to tank. Like, if the Mavericks are really going to tank, can you imagine adding a better player to tank than Big Baby Davis? Throw him out there for 25 minutes a game. Let him throw up shots and miss. Let him foul out after 10 minutes. I mean, he can go there. He can go to the Knicks if they're going to try and tank another year. He seems like a perfect fit in Sacramento's circus because him and Boogie Cousins, they might go get in a fist fight. George Karl might jump in the middle, try and break it up. His old ass breaks his nose. And before you know it, they're not a team anymore. That's a perfect tanking situation. But to go to a team and actually help them out, he's best suited in the Clippers. He's true a role player. He is a physical, dominant person that you can put in simply to pick up fouls at the end of the game. If you need to put their big men on the line, he's going to give you his money's worth on a foul. He's a high effort player, but his floor on talent is, fairly restricted.
How did we miss the most obvious? This just hit me. The most obvious place for him. Who signs every single veteran?
You really think he's going to play for Popovich? You think Popovich is going to get out of bed?
No. So my other one was the Cavs, right?
Oh,
they
yeah.
love these kind of guys, right? Like just they used to be good at one point in time. We can get them for $500K. Throw him on the bench with Perkins.
Yeah, but if LeBron's calling the shots, they're just going to pay him $10 million a year.
Yeah, why not?
It's like, hey, it's Dan Gilbert's money. Might as well pay Big Baby $10 million and get over with.
Too funny. All right, wrap us up, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for listening today, guys. Like we said, it is July 9th. We'll be back next Thursday. If you have any questions, please feel free to tweet us. If you do need anything from us, we're more than accommodating on Twitter. Any questions like that. But all we ask out of you is keep listening. Download us on iTunes. If you want, give us a rating. If it's going to be a bad rating, feel free to skip that part. But
we'll take bad ratings. And
ratings are ratings, actually. Yeah. Ratings are ratings. We'll do that.
I actually also forgot we do have an email address too. podcast@backseatbasketball.com. So Twitter,
Twitter,
iTunes,
if you've got
YouTube.
if your question's more than 160 characters and you don't want to do that weird tweet where it's like reading bottom to top, email us. We check that on a daily basis as well. Send it over there. What was the email again?
podcast@backseatbasketball.com.
There you go. You've got it. Anything else?
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jeff.
Der Hot Robbie.
Yeah, Dr. Hot Robbie and @Jeffrey Bittner.